Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. And since the release of Midnight Beta, even though the servers are pretty much on fire, a ton of lag, and it's pretty much unplayable at times, I've still been able to enjoy a ton of Rogue during my time spent with the beta so far. Mostly because of the Rogue changes in particular. Like during my alpha and beta testing of War Within, for instance, I found Rogue fun, but it definitely was lacking a lot of features that a lot of players wanted to see, and it just felt incomplete. Midnight, on the other hand, at least when it comes to Assassination, feels like the full package, and they actually have a direction for this playstyle. While there's not that many changes for Assassination on the surface, under the hood, the engine that powers the spec has gotten many nice, fantastic revamps, with a lot of the playstyle becoming more convenient to play, easier and more approachable, especially for newer players. And it actually has been super incredibly fun to dive into this spec a lot more on the beta. Like, I thought Outlaw Rogue was going to be my peak in terms of fun that I could have with Rogue, but Assassination is just on a whole nother level. So for today's video, I wanted to go over exactly what those conveniences are for Assassination and exactly what makes the playstyle that much more enjoyable, because it's very, very noticeable, and the spec has definitely got a lot more love this time around, and I wanted to go over exactly what really makes it stand out right now amongst all the other playstyles, and why actually you may want to consider possibly playing Rogue heading into Midnight. With that being said, as always, if you guys want to see more Midnight updates, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So when taking a closer look at Assassination, I think the best way to summarize a lot of their changes in Midnight is that the spec has gone through a simplification where there's a lot more conveniences throughout its basic gameplay. I mean, for the most part, Assass is not going to be all that different and all too new. You're still all about building comm points, maintaining 2 bleeds of Rupture and Corrode, which you can now actually have, show up as a pandemic with the little red square, letting you know when you should be refreshing those dots on the target, which is pretty awesome. And from there, if you don't need to refresh the bleeds, you're maintaining Envenom on the target, building comm points, and then spending them usually right before the Envenom buff falls off, so you can maintain maximum value. Look at that. Pandemic, it just allows you to just refresh it a little early. Super nice, super awesome. Same thing with Rupture, and it just makes like maintaining dots a lot easier. However, they wanted to simplify and make the playstyle even easier than normal, and the conveniences we got out of it specifically help out Assassination in AoE. I think a lot of rogues would agree that Assassination plays really straightforward and very fun, a little bit of bleed maintenance, a little bit of burst damage, big deathmark windows in a boss fight, so in single target it's really good. In AoE there's just a lot going on. AoE often ends up being very complicated, where you have to manage bleeds on literally every target, and you have to maintain all of those debuffs and, just spreading them all over the place. It's kind of like, it's a minutia. There's a lot of little debuffs for you to watch out for, and then you got to incorporate Mutilate, which is a single target comm point builder, with Phantom Knight, which is an AoE builder, in order to proc AoE effects, and there's a lot of little debuffs and things for you to manage. So they want to simplify it as much as possible, and the best way they did it is by allowing you to spread bleeds a little bit more naturally with Crimson Tempest, which is a little bit different. It's quite a heavy energy ability, but it slashes enemies in 10 yards, doing quite a bit more damage than your baseline Fan of Knives, but also it copies your longest lasting corrodes and Rupture on enemies that you hit, and up to 2 nearby enemies, which allows Assassination to have an easier time with gameplay. Like, you don't have to switch targets and constantly, swap around and maintain your bleeds anymore. You can just pick a target, usually maybe the toughest one in the group, put a corrode on them, put some comm points, probably Phantom Knives for the poison spread, and put up Rupture. And then you hit Crimson Tempest, and you'll see the bleed actually spreads. And you only gotta do it a couple of times, and that's it. You got bleeds on everybody. And this ability of Crimson Tempest, it kind of functions like an augmented version, or like a slightly stronger but a little more expensive version of Phantom Knives. So if you are, let's say, you need to refresh the Corrode, just hit it a couple of times, and now you're able to refresh the Corrode on multiple targets, and it's super nice. I personally love it. I think it plays super well into the overall Assassination Rogue playstyle. It's pretty easy to manage, so it's just a couple of clicks and you have a bunch of enemies spread with bleeds. Now the question is, I guess, is going to be, is our bleeds going to be like, are you just going to go into like a pack of like 20 mobs and just put up bleeds and then spam Crimson Tempest over and over? There is a little bit of that opportunity like on the live realms, because bleeds do a lot of damage, so you want to pull up as many of them in AoE as possible. In Midnight, you might not actually have to do that. Right now, bleeds are tuned a little bit lower than raw poison damage, which is a good portion of your other part of your AoE. But then there's also another component when it comes to energy regen that may also cause you to not have to put a bleed on every single target. Previously, venomous wounds would continue to grant you more energy the more targets you had blood up, but now there's actually a scaling factor that kind of limits how much energy regen you can get out of it. This is likely intentional just to get Assassination to spread bleeds a few times, but not have to blanket like 20 mobs in bleeds, and then use your poison damage, which can also splash in AoE, and abilities like Phantom Knives, which have gotten more support in order to deliver a lot of your AoE damage. Poison AoE has also been simplified with Caustic Spatter automatically applying to the enemy whenever you Envenom or Kingsbane. You no longer have to mutilate in single target, which is so nice. And they juice it where Caustic Spatter causes 50% of your nature damage to be splashed onto nearby targets with a soft cap of 5 targets. So that's huge. Kingsbane hits really hard, Envenoms hit incredibly hard, and even your poisons can be also a huge component of this AoE damage. There's actually a number of talents that you can pick up, maybe some like Virulent Poisons, together with higher applications from Improved Poisons and 2 points into Fatal Concoction, so your weapon auto-attack poisons actually will do a decent bit of overall AoE damage. You can also double up in poisons with Dragon Temper Blades, so you have the Deadly Poison rolling, on top of it you have the Amplifying Poison, which buffs the damage of your Envenom, which causes it to splash onto things nearby, so you might just mix a little bit of bleeds here and there, and then invest a lot of your time doing single target damage, which becomes free AoE damage, and it just costs a single talent point, which is super easy and simple for you to invest points into. Oh, I almost forgot another convenience. Shiv is no longer necessary as part of your base class abilities. Like if you type up the ability of Shiv, or not Shiv, then you'll see that all your talents with Shiv are gone. It is no longer a rotational skill. It is no longer used in order to amp up your damage. A lot of the damage amp from Shiv has been transferred back to Assassination, so it's not like you're really losing damage. You're just removing one extra button that you needed to use as a maintenance buff that you would line up together with your Kingsbane or Deathmark windows anyway. So it's actually, I think, is a good change in a good direction. Shiv is now a utilitarian skill. It is used baseline to dispel enrage effects from an enemy every 30 seconds. It's not the best enrage effect, but it's better than nothing. It also will apply a more concentrated version of your crippling poison or your numbing poison, whatever you want to end up running. So it has some utility and will be good for PvP in particular, but it's not really necessary or mandatory to run. Assassination does still have this ability as like a mandatory skill, which I really think that maybe they should rethink and just make it blind instead. I know that like Shiv is Assassination, blind is Outlaw, Subtlety is Cloak of Shadows, but I feel like if they were to switch it to blind, there would be some situations where you just don't need a Shiv, and I guess that could be potentially, I don't know, like a talent point that you can invest somewhere else than a talent tree. I think that could be kind of nice, but it's not really necessary or anything like that. So the version of Assassination that we get to play with is pretty good in that regard. Not having to shiv targets as like a setup, it is very enjoyable. One less thing for you to worry about, and damage feels pretty good without having to use it whatsoever. Now, another big apex, the apex of the crux of Assassination is the newest talent, which is the apex talent called Implacable, which is actually going to lean into a very core mechanic that many Assassination rogues, really veteran Assassination rogues, play into. So if you weren't aware, or if you're just not that familiar with Assassination, it's actually not a spammy spec. It's not meant to spam energy and common points as quickly as possible. It could actually have a slower flow, and in a way it can be rewarded for that slower flow. Just not everybody that plays the spec really picks this up from the get-go, but it does hit into some of the depths that a lot of players like about this spec in particular. So let's say outside of building and spending common points on bleeds, which you'll do at all times, which I'm not really going to do as aggressively in a train dummy, I'm also going to start using my common points on Envenom and play it the way you're supposed to play Assassination. Build the common points, wait, and then Envenom the target before the buff falls off. While Envenom is active on the target, my poison application chance is increased and the damage of Envenoms is increased by 30%. But Assassination has a bit of like a slower flow when it comes to some of their basic abilities, so it's actually meant to be a maintenance buff rather than something that you spam as aggressively as possible, letting your energy pool for a little bit before having to actually commit those common points into the finisher of Envenom. Not every rogue plays this, but veteran rogues who've been playing this spec for a very long time will be familiar with this mechanic, and it's actually part of the fun core of Assassination Rogue is being able to chain back-to-back Envenoms as much as possible. And sometimes you'll actually will stop chaining Envenoms if you're trying to pull energy for like big Deathmark windows or Kingsbane windows, and that's where you might actually spam Envenom as aggressively as possible. But outside of this, the actual flow that you're supposed to play of Assassination is a little bit more slower paced with your Envenom ability. It is not meant meant to be that aggressive in like the common point building and spending department. So Blizzard actually takes that to heart and made the Apex talent that plays around this mechanic that many players do love about the spec with Implacable. Nothing will save you from a target. I love the little flavor text in there. I feel like this might be the only spec that has a flavor text with, you know, literally says nothing will save you from a target. Envenom damage is increased by 10%. When your Envenom bonus expires, you gain 20% increased energy regeneration for 5 seconds. So whenever Envenom does fall off, it gives you an opportunity to regain some energy. You gain an additional 15% increased energy generation for each Envenom that you used while Envenom's bonus was active for up to 80% total. So basically, the more you can chain those Envenoms on the target, like you put up an Envenom and then you wait, before Envenom falls off, you'll be able to hit Envenom again and again. You should be building up a buff of Implacable. Right now, it's not functioning correctly. Instead of giving you like 20 energy, it goes back down to 10 instead of like increasing it by 15 like it says in the tooltip, which is a little unfortunate, but it does have the component of you actually gaining energy when it does fall off. So there's actually going to be some footage that you will be seeing of me playing Rogue, and if at any point I'm just letting Envenom fall off, I'm actually just kind of proccing the Implacable 20% energy regen before reapplying an Envenom. Because right now the actual Apex talent does not work properly, but the idea on paper is fantastic, and the fact that they are allowing the Assassination rogues to really lean into this like niche part of the more in-depth part of the gameplay of Assassination, I think is really cool with this Apex talent. The next two traits are just a damage increase for nature and bleeds, which covers a huge portion of your overall damage output, and the final trait actually gives you Kingsbane a bit of a bigger burst situation, where Kingsbane will rapidly strike at the target 5 times over 1 second. For physical and nature damage, each strike applies lethal poisons, which helps your Kingsbane build up additional damage. The more times you poison apply lethal poisons to your target through your weapons, the more damage the Kingsbane gains, up to 50 stacks maximum. So now when you use Kingsbane, you get 5 comm points immediately. You do this really quick, stab-a-thon at the target, and as you're able to expand and build comm points and hit the target, you'll continue to build up the damage of Kingsbane, hopefully hitting that 50% or 50 stacks as fast as possible in order to get the most amount of damage out of those big Kingsbane ticks, which is pretty awesome. However, Assassination may be in a situation where you may not be seeing that much build variety going forward. Currently, and this is not final tuning by any means, but right now it seems for Assassination, there is a heavily leaning into the ability of Envenom. There's a lot of talents that support Envenom, the AoE playstyle supports Envenom, and the Implacable playstyle also heavily reinforces the use of Envenom as a core ability, with Bleeds kind of taking a bit of a back seat. And again, like I said, this may just be a tuning thing, and they did buff Bleeds recently, but right now it doesn't seem like you can really make a Bleed build as Assassination. Technically, the points you put into your Apex talent can be reinvested anywhere else in your talent tree. Like if you really wanted to just put more points to pick up more capstones in the base spec tree, it is technically possible, but the Apex talents are so strong and feel so core to Assassination, it does feel like you kind of pigeonholed into a heavy Envenom type of a build, whether you do Mythic Plus, whether you do raiding, so Poison seems to be a very forefront feature of Assassination. And it does seem like a feature of Assassination, like a core component, not really just like a tuning thing or tuning mishap. So unless we see some crazy new changes to the talents or some crazy new tuning, it does feel like Assassination is going to be at its core an Envenom rogue, and you'll end up accenting it with a bit of blade damage or a bit of Phantom Knives damage or whatever other talents you pick up, but for the most part its core is going to be big Envenoms. So it looks like maybe you won't be able to step away from that playstyle at all if you're looking for some crazy variety. That being said, the actual focus build and the Envenom playstyle and the general flow of the spec and the AoE bleed spreads and things, it feels incredibly good. It feels better than ever, while at the same time does streamline the spec in a great way, while at the same time showing you that you don't need to have like multiple cooldowns and debuffs and things to track and overlap in order to have the spec be very enjoyable. There's still skill expression that can be made without little abilities like shift to be thrown in between of all of your other cooldowns. And the gameplay loop itself is actually very surprisingly enjoyable, because I was thinking it was going to compromise on a lot of the core things that I usually love about Assassination, but it doesn't do that at all. The spec actually embraces the single target and priority damage gameplay, allowing you to focus in on a single target instead of like a big trash bag, spread your bleeds super easily without having to tab around to multiple targets, while continuing to spend the rest of your comm points on Envenoms, which gives you strong single target, splashes AoE to everything else, and where you don't necessarily need to compromise on like a pure AoE build or a pure single target build. So it looks like they're finding like their footing in terms of what players really like about Assassination, and are just embracing it as much as they can. But out of all the things that I found surprising, I actually just found Assassination a lot more fun during this development testing. And I played development and testing builds of previous expansions like alphas and betas of Shadowlands, Dragonflight, War Within, and War Within was the first expansion where I actually was very disappointed with rogues, and I ended up spending majority of that development stage of the expansion not really playing rogue, literally playing every other class outside of rogue, because my favorite class was looking pretty grim. But heading into Midnight, we got so many different classes that are vying for my attention, from the changes to Warlocks, Devourer, Demon Hunter, Survival Hunter, and some of the big boomstick damage that they get to go into. Fury Warriors and some of those designs look also very, very promising. The Unholy Death Knight whole build of summoning an army of ghouls looks incredibly fun, but I'm just having a really hard time peeling myself off from the class of Rogue, which I think, if anything, probably says it's in a pretty decent spot heading into Midnight. And so far, what I've been able to preview with Assassination is definitely promising, especially if you're somebody who always had a hard time playing the spec and Mythic Plus content. I think that's where it's going to perform the best in, while also retaining a lot of its core of what makes it really fun and enjoyable within raid setting in particular. But with that being said, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like, as it would very, very much appreciate it. Also, be sure to join our Discord community, especially if you just want to keep up with any Midnight Beta updates. As always, let me know your thoughts about Assassination Rogue in the comments down below. Are you potentially excited about maybe playing a Rogue heading into Midnight? And what are your thoughts on Assassination Rogue so far? Does everything that we talked about in terms of the changes and adjustments and conveniences that are available in the spec excite you about possibly playing it, whether as an alt or as a main? Or do you still have a couple of hang-ups in particular that are still holding you from it? And if you do, I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts. What are those hang-ups specifically? Like, what changes would you want Blizzard to make before you really want to consider actually giving it a solid shot going forward? Let me know those thoughts in the comments down below. But with that being said, as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.